se los vamos a agradecer. De antemano les ofrecemos las disculpas del caso por este pequeño retraso, pero solo quería dar la certeza de que
I just wanted
estamos a
to
punto
let you
en unos
know
segundos
that
más
we
de dar
are
inicio a
just
esta
about
transmisión
to
con
begin
lanzamiento y
the
conferencia de
live
prensa.
streaming
Muchas
of the
gracias.
press conference. Thank you very much.
Estamos listos, Guido. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, secretaria ejecutiva.
We are ready,
Muy
Guido. Thank
amable.
you very much. Thank you.
Les anticipaba entonces, vamos a
Executive
dar
Secretary,
inicio
thank you
a
very
esta
much for your
conferencia de
kind
prensa sobre el lanzamiento
remarks.
del
We will
informe de la
begin
CEPAL
the
sobre el
press
balance preliminar
conference
de las
on
economías de América
ECLAC's
Latina y el Caribe
preliminary overview of the
2020.
economies of Latin
Queremos
America and the
dar a
Caribbean
todos
2020.
la
We would
bienvenida
like
y
to
buenos
welcome you
días,
all to
en
this
algunos
event.
casos ya
And
buenas tardes,
good morning to some of you,
desde
good
Santiago de
afternoon to
Chile.
some of you. And
Esta
we are
conferencia de prensa
joining you live
y
from
lanzamiento se
Santiago,
está
Chile.
realizando de
So
manera
this
virtual, como les digo,
launching
desde
and press
Santiago a través
conference
de la
is taking
plataforma
place
Zoom.
virtually through
Estamos
Zoom from
transmitiendo
Santiago,
simultáneamente
Chile. We are streaming live as
live.cepal.org
well
en YouTube
at
y a través también de la portada del
live.cepal.org,
sitio de la CEPAL,
as well as on the
www.cepal.org,
ECLAC
de la misma manera que lo
website.
estamos haciendo a través
So
de redes
we
sociales,
have
en
also
Twitter
live
y en
stream
Facebook.
through
Queremos saludar a todas las
several
personas que nos están
social
acompañando en
media,
esta
Facebook
transmisión,
and Twitter. So I would
muy
like
en
to thank
especial
all of you who are
a los
joining
periodistas que
us,
se han registrado
especially the
para
journalists
participar
who
de
have
este lanzamiento, así como los colegas de la
registered to
CEPAL y el Sistema de las Naciones
to
Unidas
take part in
que lo
this
están
event.
siguiendo desde
So,
sus lugares de trabajo en
and
este
welcome all of you
periodo
from the
de
UN
pandemia.
family who are
A
joining us
las y
from
los
their
periodistas que nos
your
acompañan,
virtual
queremos
desks.
aprovechar esta
So we would like
ocasión
to thank the
de
journalists
darles un
joining us
tributo de
here today
agradecimiento. Es probablemente el
and
último lanzamiento que haremos durante
mention
este
that this is the
2020
last
y gran parte de
publication we
ustedes,
will launch in
prácticamente todos, nos
2020,
han
and many of you, practically
acompañado
all
a
of
lo
you,
largo de este año
have joined
intenso y
us throughout
complejo
this
en
extremely
las
complicated and
diversas
intense
presentaciones
year
que
of
la CEPAL ha hecho de
sundry
sus informes
presentations
especiales
and
y sus
publications
informes anuales.
that ECLAC
Convencionales.
has
Nuestra
conducted.
gratitud
Special
por la
reports,
discusión, por el
annual reports.
interés
So
que han
once
demostrado
again, we would like to
en
reiterate
el
our
quehacer,
profound
en las
appreciation
propuestas, en la
for
idea y en
you
los
joining
datos
us
que
at
presenta
these various
periódicamente
events
la CEPAL.
that
La
have
presentación de este
taken place
documento
throughout this year.
la va a
Now,
realizar
this
nuestra secretaria
document
ejecutiva,
will
doña Alicia
be presented
Bárcena
to you by our
Ibarra,
executive
quien va a entregar las
secretary,
principales conclusiones
Alicia
de este informe.
Bárcena, and she will provide
Luego de
us
esta
with
presentación
the
daremos
final
paso a la ronda,
conclusions
como
on
lo hacemos
this
habitualmente, de
publication.
preguntas
And then
de
following
parte de
that,
las
we
y
will
los
move on
periodistas.
with
Queremos
Q&A
recordarle a los representantes de los medios de comunicación
by the
acreditados
journalists.
que
I
por
would
favor nos
like
envíen
to
tan pronto
remind
como les
the
fuese posible
accredited
por
agencies
escrito, ya
to
sean vía
please
chat
send
en el
us
Zoom en
in
esta
writing,
plataforma
whether
o
via chat on
preferentemente
the
al
Zoom
correo
platform or to
conferenciaprensa
the
arroba
email
cepal.org.
conferencias
Conferencia
prensas
prensa,
at
todo junto, arroba
cepal.org.
cepal.org. Vamos a estar
Your
recibiendo allí
questions in
sus
writing. Okay,
inquietudes, sus
that is where
preguntas.
we will be
Apelo
receiving your
a su buena
questions
disposición para
and
que nos la
or
hagan llegar tan
comments.
pronto
And I
como les
would
sea
like
posible.
to
Ya hay un número
request
significativo de ellos.
that
Vamos a
you
tratar de
do
dar
this as
cuenta
soon as
de la
possible
mayoría, pero los
so that we will be
invito
able
a que
to
nos hagan
answer
llegar sus
as many
inquietudes
as
por esa vía.
possible.
Conferencia prensa
Very well then,
arroba
to the email
cepal.org. Sin nada más de mi parte, no resta más que entregar la palabra para el inicio de este lanzamiento del balance
or
preliminar
the
de las economías de
Zoom
América
chat. So
Latina y el
without further
Caribe
ado, I would
2020
like to
a
give the floor
Alicia
to Alicia
Ibarra,
Bárcena,
secretaria
the
ejecutiva
Ibarra,
de
the
esta Comisión
Executive
Económica para
Secretary
América
of
Latina y el
the
Caribe. Secretaria ejecutiva,
Economic Commission
la
for
palabra es
Latin
suya.
America and the Caribbean. Distinguished Secretary. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Prior to beginning, I would like to, of course, recognize the outstanding work of the team behind this preliminary overview led by Daniel Titelman and a strong group of individuals, Noel Pérez, Ivan Pérez, Michael Hani, Pablo Carvalho, Albert Host, and of course others, Bianca Aliana, and many other individuals at the national, regional level who have worked closely with us on this publication and other publications. So the team buoying up this publication has been quite robust. So I am one of your favorite fans. Let us first begin by referring to some of the key messages. First of all, What is the current global situation? What is the global economy doing today? Well, we know that it has experienced the worst economic contraction since 1946. We also know that globally, this has been a year marked by a very profound economic and health crisis, and with this veil of ongoing uncertainty with regard to the evolution of the pandemic. We know that global contraction this year will be the worst since 1946, and this is widespread. Now, the only exception is China, and that is very important as far as our region is concerned, and we will see that in a bit. Now, also, we know that China is not experiencing a contraction, but it is the only major economy that is not doing well. Now, the global economy is also contracting at a higher rate, the highest rate since the subprime crisis. And the global economy, has not been able to bounce back. And as well as the interesting response to the pandemic and announcements of fiscal monetary packages. Now, this reaction has been unprecedented, and we are referring to $12 trillion have in fiscal stimulus have been announced, accompanied by 7.5 trillion in monetary stimulus. Now, this clearly has a significant repercussion for us in Latin America and the Caribbean, because we have seen high levels of liquidity, low interest rates, and of course, an increase in overall indebtedness, regional as well, as we will see, global and regional. And for 2021, we are expecting for a recovery of the global economy. But of course, all of this is subject to a great deal and bound by uncertainty. Many of us really do not know what will occur in the future, what repercussions all of this will have. For example, the production and distribution of the vaccine, the trajectory of aggregate demand. There are several other factors. For example, what will occur with the global liquidity? Will we see that the fiscal measures will remain in place or not? So there's a series of questions that we have not been able to answer. There's not much clarity there. And I think this is one of the most uncertain situations that we have faced internationally. Now, let's talk about our region. Our region is the most impacted region in the developing world. Now, this, of course, when we compare all the health-related
las fragmentaciones que tenemos en nuestra región. El Fondo Monetario es el que incluso pues ha demostrado que la América Latina y el Caribe es la región más golpeada del mundo en desarrollo. Nuestra contracción es la peor en 120 años y se suma, además, a una trayectoria de bajo crecimiento desde 2014, ¿verdad? Una trayectoria que estaba en torno al 0,4%. Por lo tanto, podemos afirmar que la región está ante una década perdida. Y este es el tema de fondo que debemos confrontar. Y el impacto, ¿verdad? Obviamente la pandemia ha tenido un gran impacto económico.
Has been quite significant in terms of the economic realm, and we have seen an unprecedented combination of negative supply and demand shocks. Here, clearly, we know that we have all been confined for long periods of time and lockdowns, and many businesses, economic activities have been shut down. As far as demand is concerned, we have also seen a significant contraction, specifically with regard to income, revenue. And that is what our region is currently facing and has faced over the year. And the pandemic clearly has magnified our historical structural problems, inequality, limited fiscal space, low productivity, high level of informal economies, fragmentation of the health and the social protection. We do not have universal health or social protection either. And despite all of this, we see that there is a lack of innovation in terms of the economic structures, and the economies are not as resilient as they should be. And I do believe that there are some aspects that are very challenging for regions such as ours. And as we also know, supply has been impacted. We've been facing lockdowns and confinements. And so it's clear that there will be a profound contraction moving forward as well. Now, governments have made significant fiscal monetary efforts, and these have mitigated the effects of the crisis. We will actually see that the second quarter for some countries was better than the expected. And this is for some countries. And the third quarter was better than that was expected as well. So it's somewhat less worse than what we had expected or estimated in June. And for 2021, we are expecting to see a positive GDP growth rate. Now, why? Well, fundamentally, this reflects a statistical rebound quarter by quarter. And in the end, the growth rate will be positive. At least that is what we have expected or estimated. Now, I would like to point out the detailed, go in and zoom in on the statistical rebound. We have to look into that. And in order to reach the pre-crisis economic level, well, we'll have to wait until 2024 for that show to come on. We'll talk about that later. And now, in order to prevent the region from actually persisting in its low growth dynamics, we will have to have active fiscal monetary policies. And what ECLAC is proposing is to link this emergency with the midterm and have synergies between economic, fiscal, environmental, industrial policies that will allow us to jumpstart this structural change and growth at the same time that must be pro-employment. We will look at that later. Employment will be the largest challenge and hurdle that our economies will have to face. So let's take a peek at the forecast for 2021. As we mentioned, they are subject to this extremely high level of uncertainty. First of all, we don't know the degree of this intensity and the spread of the second wave of infections. The global economy in 2020 had a 4.4 drop in activity, and we clearly expect 2021 to have some sort of a rebound, 5.2, but this rebound and recovery will be closely tied to the impact of this second wave of infections and economies' flexibility to deal with this, and the flexibility with regard to the agility with regard to the vaccination campaign. We know that developed economies have their vaccine reserves, quote unquote. They have them, but the developed economies do not and have not. And this is a major issue for the world and for the UN specifically. So we have seen that this 4.4 drop in the global economic activity may clearly be turned around in 2021. It's possible, but once again, this is closely tied to what will occur on the vaccination front with regard to confinement, additional lockdowns, distribution, etc., and also the economy's abilities to maintain fiscal monetary policies. And let's not forget the geopolitical commercial tensions that exist, the technological issues that are trying to be worked out, and of course, the social unrest that we have seen in many of our countries. So let's refer once again to the global economy, 4.4 drop in the global economy in 2020. We expect to see economic recovery of 5.2% in 2021. And I pointed out two economies that are essential. 4.1 in the US economy, obviously growth of 3.6 is forecast for 2021, being of course optimistic in that the vaccination will be available in 2021. In the United States, that's very likely. As far as China is concerned, we already mentioned that the only economy that grew in 2020, 1.9%, and is forecast to have an 8.1% growth in 2021. Now, that's for China. That is key for our economies, by the way. Now, of course, you can look at the finer points of this table figure later on, but that is essentially what I wanted to point out regarding this table. Now, let's move into the realm of trade. We see that global trade, and this is according to figures from the WTO, is projected to be lower than 2020. I will change the slides. Don't worry, in one moment. So we see a drop in 2020 of 7.2% of, I correct myself, 9.2% in 2020. And this global drop is the most profound since the economic and financial crisis since the subprime crisis in 2009. Now the drop in the subprime was 12.8, but now it's 9.2%, a drop in the global trade. Now the difference here is that following the subprime crisis, the recovery is 3.9%, and now it's only going to be 7.2. Actually, it's following the subprime is 13.9, and now it's only going to be 7.2. So that is the current scenario regarding global trade. And this is not just because of the pandemic. This is something that started occurring prior to the pandemic. And we saw that there were 3 key hubs where we were seeing that the value chains were breaking down. They were so globalized, but now they're less globalized. We see that there's this reshoring process and the nearshoring of many companies, and this has clearly altered the trade dynamic. I think it's important to point that out. Also, I would like to point out what's going on in China. Now, China is the country that in the second quarter, the only country that will have a rebound of its trade, both exports and imports. So this is the current situation. It's very important for our economy.
As we said, since there have been this great international stimuli because of the measures adopted by the main countries in the world, we will have a global liquidity, a huge increase in global liquidity. This is the case, and this was the case, especially starting in the first quarter in everywhere, especially in the United States, in the Eurozone, United Kingdom, Japan. All of them had a positive evaluation of monetary supply, and this is current flows of money in the banks, etc. And this is very important to understand that there is an important increase in liquidity. And what the region is asking is that the liquidity be distributed in a better manner, because this has happened in the past, and it has resulted effectively in better financial flows towards emerging economies. Financial flows in the first part of 2020 had a significant drop, but starting on the second and third quarter of 2020, there is a significant recovery, especially from China, but all the rest of the countries also. But in reality, emerging markets start receiving real monetary flow inputs this is important because, and we are in market very relevant moment in which liquidity here you can see what financial volatility depends. To say, well, we told it's necessary to run into debt years ago. The fall of emerging markets as stock exchanges at a critical point, and the pandemics. Without any doubt, when the pandemics arrived in the first semester, quarter to 2020, it's a cut of incoming money flows towards emerging countries. And this translated, if you see total issuance of debt in international markets, specifically treasury bonds. And we wanted to highlight that this significant increase in liquidity has an impact on how the region has been more successful or has had more access to this very important market. And it is estimated that the region will receive financial flow that would allow to cover the current account deficit and expand money reserves. But this is the case for some countries. We need to be very clear about the huge heterogeneity of Latin American and Caribbean countries. Not all countries have the ability to place treasury bond, only the main economies. The sovereign risk has cut down. There are significant improvements, specifically in the negotiation of Argentina and Ecuador. And in truth, today we can see the index of treasury bonds of emerging markets is in 467 base point, low, very low as compared to the closing in April. So the issue of treasury bonds increased 45%. So treasury bonds that are placed by the finance ministry or quasi-sovereign are those placed by state-owned company, commercial bonds from private company, and supranational. These are multilateral development banks. But I want to highlight the idea of treasury bonds. Peru placed a 100-year treasury bond. That's incredible. And this has helped absolutely to uphold and sustain international research, and also to counterbalance any deficit that our economies may have. And we see that on the month of May. Very important for our region is how the behavior of commodity prices. In the first month of 2020, there was a market drop. And you can see clearly here, we would say that it was a reverse on the drop of commodities, and they are now at levels higher than at the beginning of the pandemic. So the blue line shows that energy products that have not recovered so well, but there was a significant drop, but there's a start of recovery in commodity, but those that recovered better are basic metal, agricultural product, and fine metals. And you can see on the graph how these can be are increased importantly, with the only exception of oil, which is minus 25%, but this is related to the, we are comparing prices from November 25th with December 31. So we see some variation, significant variation in oil from Texas, copper, and gold. If we go to 2021 forecast, there will be a significant recovery. If everything goes as today, this recovery relates with China. This coincides also the recovery of on prices will be very relevant, because during the decrease of commodities, this also translated into lower prices for our exports, and particularly for oil exporting countries that suffered most, but also agro-industrial product, smaller, but they also suffered some impact. So for by 2021, there will be a better behavior of price behavior, especially for commodities will increase 9%, agro-food for energy products 16. So that can be good news for exporters. But here we see how exports of goods, good export, we're going to present our trade report, but this is an advance on how export in the region that suffer a significant drop, a 13% drop, accompanied by a greater drop in import, which is around 20%. So you can see here how this affects. And here you can see the price component and volume component, and you see how oil exporters are those that have suffered most during this period. Mexico, because it's the combination of both, and the drop in import. It's very important, very relevant, because it has a huge impact on investment. Not having import of capital goods also has an effect on our economy. This is a current account deficit from 0.4 with respect to 1.8 in 2019, but not for the good reasons, because of reason that by decreasing imports, we're also impacting on investments to some extent. So remittances is it's crucial. issue. The behavior has been very heterogeneous. Mexico and Central America has been very resilient and surprising enough. Linked to the job market, the labor market in the US, where most Mexican, Central American migrants are there in the US, they work in basic service, so they are not unemployment, and also they have received stimuli packages in the US, and this explains why Mexico and Central America have greater resiliences, not other countries. The case of Paraguay, Peru, Bolivia, Costa Rica, Paraguay, because migrants that send remittances are from other destinations, not US. So the behavior is different. So we see that Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Nicaragua, to a smaller extent, do not have experienced this significant drop in remittances. This is very important to explain because the greater downturn in the activity in Latin America and the Caribbean was felt in the second quarter of 2020. The second quarter was horrible. It was minus 15% in terms on average. Mexico, Central America, the downturn was much deep, and we see on a country by country basis what happened regarding the year-to-year growth of the GDP. In the third quarter 2020, we may notice that the drop is lower compared to the second quarter. So, and this will be very important when we are going to explain about statistical carry forward, because we compare third quarter with second quarter 2020. So there was some economic activity. So the downturn or the drop is less in year-to-year terms. We are comparing year-to-year basis, but the carry forward that we're going to explain deals with how is the behavior of the economy on a quarter-to-quarter basis. On the third quarter 2020, there's some, we call some recovery, really, and this relates to the opening of the economic activity, and also with the big fiscal packages received both by family, households, and companies. But also still a huge downturn or drop. So attention, when we say that it was not so deep, there is a drop. We need to speak, it's less than what we estimated. We estimated 9.1, now the drop will be 7.8, 7.7, but it doesn't mean that we will not have a strong drop, especially in aggregated demand. If you see the year-to-year variation rate, this is year-to-year variation rate fell to 19.8%, the worst since 2011, when we had a positive year-to-year variation rate. And there we have private consumption, which also experienced a significant fall related to lesser income. In July, we estimated 19%. Today will be 10% because there was some recovery in this third quarter of 2020. And the volume of export of goods and services, the year-to-year rate, as we see, it also has a very deep fall. When we observe investment compared to GDP, here is where we see that our region has the worst performance compared to other regions and globally. Our region, compared to investment to GDP, the ratio is 16%. If you see other region, you see globally, the European Union, etc., the behavior is much higher, much better, without any doubt. Developing economies and emerging countries, China, we are worse than Maghreb or Sub-Saharan Africa. We compare worse to any other region in the world regarding investment. And this is key, and we need to address and deal with the problem. Towards by 2020, the unemployment rate will be 10.7, and you will see, but you told us that it was 13. That what happened? What happened is that the rate of the share of participation, people looking for a job, the table say 62.5% is the number of people that were looking for a job. As you see, 2020, it dropped to 57.2. So people looking for a job. So the unemployment rate refers to people that are looking less employment. So the employment rate is 10.7%. If we consider that the same people that the share of unemployment would be the similar 2019, 2020. Same people looking in 2019 for employment, the unemployment would be 18.5%. So 8 more points, and this is higher on women than in men, because women are looking less for job because they have the pressure at the household, because they are the main caregivers, etc. So I wanted to point out this because it is very, very important that we can see that women, especially women as always, will be the most affected ones.
So what are the countries doing? I think this is very important because fiscal policy is playing a more important role than ever before in many regards. And the countries have implemented fiscal measures to soften the pandemic impact. And let's take a peek here at what the countries are investing, at least until a certain point, in terms of fiscal effort, first column, and state credit guarantees, second column. Now, these are two different sectors of support, both of which are important, of course. 4.3 is the average for fiscal efforts, 2.5 is the average for state credit guarantees. Now, this needs to be carefully assessed. Why? Well, because some countries have not called for so much fiscal effort because their health systems, for example, are better. They may have universal access to healthcare, or they may already have other guarantees, or there are other income or pension or healthcare related benefits. Uruguay, for example, is quite emblematic in our region, as is Costa Rica. These are two countries with much better access to social protection networks. And so clearly they have better capacity, and therefore they do not call for so much emergency related fiscal efforts as the other countries have called for. And then the scope, the magnitude of the fiscal efforts are also related to the available fiscal structure, the economy, the ability to mobilize additional resources, and of course the scope of the healthcare system. So what have the countries used these for? Well, top and most important, to provide buoy up the healthcare systems, and two, to help the households. And as a result of that, in the first quarter this year was not as bad as the second quarter this year. And also they've used these resources to protect public spending and liquidity instruments, government-backed liquidity instruments, so they protect their productive capacity. We will see what has also occurred in 2020 in terms of tax revenue. Obviously, if trade is impacted, tax revenue follows suit, and this is very key. So tax revenue have also dropped at 0.7, at a rate of 0.7%. Other revenue are okay, plus 0.1%. But generally speaking, in 2020, we have this cumulative effect from January to September, which is 13.1. And so the drop hasn't been so dramatic, if you will, but clearly we continue to see problems in Latin America as well as in the Caribbean. This chart compares 12 Latin American countries and 8 Caribbean nations. And we see that, yes, there has been a drop, less in Latin America from 13.6 to 13.1 and 13.2 and 12.4 in the Caribbean. It's been worse in the Caribbean because obviously the tourism industry has been severely impacted globally. So that has truly impacted the Caribbean. And that's why we are so concerned with the delicate situation in the Caribbean. We have also seen that public spending has increased. Look at the increase. We have seen that it's gone from 15.2 in Latin America, the same 12 countries, to 18.1 in 2020 and 12.8 to 14.8 in the Caribbean, same 8 countries. Now, obviously, this has had a significant impact. And what we have seen is that clearly we have seen an impact in terms of current transfers. What do I mean here? Condition transfers, pensions, all type of transfers. These, to a certain extent, are calculated 12.2%, 12.1%, and then wage subsidies, income subsidies, those have also been impacted. But obviously, capital spending is quite low. Interest payments should be included here as well. And as far as the Caribbean is concerned, we also observe that to a great extent, the problem that the Caribbean always faces is an impact in terms of the revenue, income. Now, obviously, some countries have done better. For example, Barbados has made significant efforts, key here, worth pointing out. So also we see that the region's fiscal position has deteriorated, has worsened. It wasn't doing so well, and now it is increasingly worse. And we have seen a significant impact in terms of primary deficit. Let's look at Brazil, 2019, the deficit was less than 1. Now it is 9.6. I would have to say that that is the country most impacted. Argentina at a challenging starting point as well, but has increased. It had a certain surplus and now it has a deficit. And also, all of the countries have seen that there has been a significant increase in the primary deficit, which to a certain extent does make the fiscal uh, area of the countries a bit more challenging. And that's the key issue. We see that the same has occurred in the Caribbean as has occurred in Latin America. We see a significant worsening. Trinidad and Tobago, the Bahamas, very concrete examples of a significant deterioration. But I would have to see practically across the board in the entire region, this has been the case. Now, logically, we have seen that there are greater financing needs. As a result, the countries have had to hit the streets and look for financing. And so debt has also increased. Central government debt from 2019, December to September 2020, has increased by 46% with regard to the GDP. And we also have to say that the GDP has dropped, so clearly that increases the proportion in real terms. This is a significant increase. We are talking about roughly 6.4, 7.4 points. Look at the Caribbean. The situation is different, but some of the economies obviously have had to take on more debt. And this is quite important because in the Caribbean, a high level of indebtedness is an issue. These are the most indebted countries. Look at the Bahamas, 130.5, Belize, 121.9. Now, these are economies that do not have a payment capacity on the one hand, and then also they're taking on more debt. So we have to figure out how, very closely examine how to aid these countries. Now, we also see that we have public spending that is also closely tied to a significant increase in current transfers. These have been used as one of the most widely used tools throughout the region to respond to the crisis. For example, let's take Uruguay as an example. Uruguay already had 14.4 in transfers prior to the pandemic. Hasn't increased that much, but some countries have had to really dig their heels in. Look at Peru, 3.1 to 5.6 in order to reach a higher level of current transfers. Mexico was starting off quite well, 7.9, and increased to 8.6. And then let's look at El Salvador. Significant efforts there, 3.8 to 7.3. So clearly, current transfers represent one way for the countries to make this fiscal effort. This is one way that they have provided support to the households and to companies as well, and by way of subsidies for wages, income, salaries, for example. In the Caribbean, we have 7 very interesting cases as well. Although the Caribbean has had a better starting off point. Now, with regard to inflation, we know that historically they have been low. We can always already say that, but there are a few exceptions in the region. Of course, Argentina and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela are two key exceptions. Haiti, as well, is another exception. So, when we show this bar chart, we are referring to what's going on in Latin America and the Caribbean, but here we are excluding on the left Argentina, Haiti, and Venezuela, and on the right, we exclude those 3 countries as well. Why? Well, it is necessary for us to have a regional perspective without including these outliers, which are really off the chart. Now, here we are referring to the change in the rates of variation in the consumer price index over a 12-month period, weighted average. Both slides, both graphs refer to this, and this is per type of inflation. Here, specifically, we are addressing this issue from 2 perspectives. Now, what is important here is that inflation, generally speaking, is low inflation rate. On the right, the situation is different. Of course, this is referring to service sector inflation, where perhaps it has increased the most. And so we disaggregate food, goods, and services so that we can understand the specificity. And on the left, we have an average. On the right, we refer to the different type of inflation, whether this is underlying food, goods, or services. And what we see is that the service inflation really has skyrocketed. And in the region, though, generally speaking, across the board, the inflation rates are relatively low. And this has allowed for expansionary monetary policies. Well, not necessarily because of the right reasons. If you have low inflation, there are 2 repercussions here. On the one hand, okay, this is fine, better for the household, clearly, but on the other hand, it shows that aggregate demand has weakened. So perhaps we see that food inflation has increased more so than the other types, in addition to services inflation. Let's move into the monetary realm. I think it's important to mention that there have been conventional as well as unconventional policies applied here. Now, this, on the one hand, the conventional monetary policies have resulted in lower interest rates. What the policymakers were interested in was injecting liquidity into the economy. And how have they done that? Well, on the one hand, by dropping the interest rates, and on the other hand, by trying to use unconventional measures to make some, if you will, adjustments so that the central banks can use papers to purchase papers in the commercial or the public banking sector. If you have the commercial banking sector, you're able to purchase some papers that provide greater liquidity to the banking industry. And that is so that the economy as a whole may have greater availability of money, more money circulating in the end. So essentially, this has occurred in all of the countries in the region except for the dollar pegged economies, the dollarized economies. You can see that this has had a positive impact on these English speaking economies, for example, as well as countries with aggregate targets and countries that use the policy rate as the main instrument. But this has not been positive for the dollarized countries. We have seen that the opposite has occurred, where in those are economies where the uh, monetary availability is lower. Now let's move on to something that we're all interested in, and I'm referring to the forecast for 2020, the 2020 outlook. Now here, we are referring to economic growth and projections for 2020, we have seen overall drop in the region is 7.7%. And in South America, experienced a significant drop in the first quarters of the year. First 3 quarters of the year, there was a significant drop in GDP in South America. As a result, this is one of the regions that has not secured greater growth. It's minus 7.3% for South America. I would have to say that Brazil has recovered better, it's bounced back better in the 3rd quarter of the year. And as we mentioned, all of the economies in the region bounced back between the 2nd and 3rd quarter of the year. This has created a situation in which, although we have negative figures here, they're all negative. They're all negative. I'm not saying that we're doing that much better off than we were in July, but we see that the fall may be slightly softened. But nonetheless, the situation is quite challenging in Central America and in Mexico, for example. Clearly, there continues to be a significant contraction in Central America and in Mexico. And Central America without Mexico is minus 6.5%. When we take into consideration Central America and Mexico together, it's 8.5%, minus 8.5%. Mexico alone has a minus 9% or a drop of 9%. So I would have to say that the lesser of all the evils between the 2nd and 3rd quarter we see was recorded for the South American countries, primarily in Brazil. As far as the Caribbean is concerned, we can also see a drop of 7.9%, the exception being Guyana. We know why, because oil there is one of the key elements. Now, as far as the various sectors are concerned, clearly we have seen that the current situation has had many negative repercussions on all of the sectors, but at different rates. I would have to say the manufacturing, construction, trade, transportation industries have been mostly affected. In agriculture, to a lesser extent, financing services and mining have done okay. The mining sector is playing a key role in some of the economies, such as Chile, obviously.
So what we see is in 2021, the GDP growth rate will have a rebound, and we estimate a very positive 3.7% growth. This rate reflects a significant statistical carry forward and rebound, which is linked to the economic activity that has taken place in the final quarter of 2020. The worst one was the 2nd quarter of 2020, except for Brazil. That was amazing. They experienced a lesser drop than expected, but all the rest of the country experienced a significant drop, as we saw on page 11. Maybe we can go back to this so we can understand what happened to us. Here, what is clearly seen, the big drop on going towards the 2nd quarter 2020. When we make the cut, we say, well, the economies will drop and minus 9.1, but from the 2nd to the 3rd quarter, the recovery, not recovery, less drop. And the huge surprise was Brazil, Paraguay, without any doubt, and all economies, with the exception of Nicaragua, but all the others, had a less, not that bad performance. The lesser evil, but worst bad anyway. And this explains what is happening in 2021. So this forecast, please, ladies and gentlemen, loud and clear, they are subject to many changes, because there are huge uncertainties, especially the vaccination progress. Are we going to receive the vaccine or not? How our region is going to grow? It's has a huge uncertainty. So we need to be very pragmatic in this sense. And this is why we present this graph on this page. In this graph, we de-aggregate the estimated 3.5% growth, but it is de-aggregated in two lines. One, the component of statistical carry forward, these quarter-to-quarter based changes that accrue or accumulate and give us the statistical carry forward. This is explained at 3.7%, but if we go to the real actual growth, how much economic activity will recover, we say 3.1% or minus 3%, sorry. So in the final 6th year, we have had a very low growth, 0.3%, 0.4% since 2014. So there's no reason that I would say to assess whether we're going to grow more than in the past trajectory. But on a quarter-to-quarter basis, the carry forward has been 3.1%. In Latin America, the real growth is 0.6%. In Central America and Mexico, the rebound is 3.0%, and the real dynamic, the real growth will be 0.8% in our estimation. But we wanted to de-aggregate in order for you to know what we think can take place or happen in 2021. Maybe if 2021, this 3.7% rate will be confirmed, but there's the risk that we can go back to the recent historical rate. In the last decade, our rate was 1.8. That was the average for the last decade. So if we go back to the 1.8% rate, the level of activity before the pandemic would only be reached in 2024. If we go back to the 0.3% historical rate, it will take 10 years to recover. So this is what we want to say here, that the crisis will be long lasting. It will last more than we estimate. So 2021 will be, I hope, a better year. But there are 4 factors that we need to assess. One, vaccination. Are we going to receive it or not? Second, whether it is possible to continue with expansionary monetary policies, because lack of stimulus may stop the reactivation or the recovery. Inflation can become a restriction to the expansionary monetary policies, and also that the financial condition will be the same with access to liquidity, and that there is a funding in favorable conditions. This is what we are looking for internationally, and also that commodity prices are the same. These are the 4 assumptions that we require in order to affirm, state that we will be able to uphold the same growth rates. We need to understand or see those rates under the light of the very harsh drop. The dynamic on 2021 will depend on outbreaks, new outbreak. This is something that without any doubt, France, Italy, Germany are undergoing this new outbreak of COVID-19. And this will be important because this can lead us to a downward bias. When will the vaccine be available in our countries? Soon, universally. That could be an upward bias to maintain fiscal monetary stimulus. That could be also a positive element to progress, to move forward. We need to move forward in investment. Investment is key. Some countries have understood this clearly. Mexico is making great effort to allocate public resources to investment, but it should be in dynamic, job creating, employment of technology, innovation, and sustainable. So we need to understand that we need to maintain expansionary policies, because we will have low growth and increasing social cost. We will need to continue to provide support and help to the population. In the coming month, we need to assign the emergency basic income to poorer household in order to keep income progressively. Without any doubt, countries must make great effort in tax administration to cut evasion and tax avoidance, to assess taxes and privileges given to companies, to corporations. We just held a meeting on extractive industry. So because we want to attract foreign investment, we give them tax privileges, but the cost is more than 6.1% of the GDP. To consolidate income tax to persons and to corporation. And inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean is larger in terms of income than net worth than of income. Taxes and how to prioritize expenditure. We need to prioritize in job-intensive investment strategic sectors, household basic income, funding SMEs in strategic sectors, incentive to production development. We have 40 million households not connected to the internet. So families that were prevented from doing teleeducation and teleworking. And unemployment insurance, improving health, education, and pensions. I have less than my finger. And the monetary policy needs to continue conventional and non-conventional policies to really provide room for liquidity. There is more liquidity in the economies, and we need to take advantage of the low inflation to sustain expansionary policies and adequate inbound capital. So how to reinforce macroprudential framework to stop unwanted capital inflows. That's key. And how to take advantage from international reserve and other financial instruments such as swaps. And the Treasury in the US has done it, and expanding agreements with the Monetary Fund, the World Bank, etc., the IMF, etc. And also beyond that, the national and domestic effort, we require international cooperation and funding. And the recent Latin America and the Caribbean summit with Europe last Tuesday, we clearly requested Europe from support. There is liquidity in the world. So we need to redistribute liquidity and reinforce reserves of our countries and regional agreement. The FLAC can be one of interregional mechanisms. The inclusion of vulnerable medium income countries in the fund, in the idea to the G20 debt service suspension initiative and swap the case in the Caribbean and Central America. Hurricanes have shown how vulnerable our region is. fund to alleviate COVID-19, it's proposed by Costa Rica, will make an available $16 billion, which is not too much for developed country, but can support with concessional, non-free funding, low interest rates to countries that need it so much. Irrespective of if they are medium income or not. Capitalization of multilateral, regional, and national institutions. The international arrangement for restructuring international debt, how to rearrange so it's not on a case-by-case negotiation, because they are lessons learned that can be shared multilaterally, how to adjust graduation and allow assign or allocation to include less developed country, and the creation of resilience fund. And in fact, we will continue to insist in key issue, how to growth with employment. This will be the huge challenge. We need to grow, but with employment. And the only way is to focus on dynamic sectors. And we propose it in ECLAC that can promote technological change that generate quality employment, that reduce the environmental footprint. For instance, if we reduce the content of fossil fuel and we move to non-conventional renewable energy, we can decarbonize the power network from 12 to 40% of renewable energy at an annual cost of 1.35% of the GDP, reducing in 30% the emission of accumulated CO2 emissions, and generated 7 million employments in 32 years. Circular economy is very important because we can establish local productive chains and management of waste. In the Alliance for the Pacific, that made the decision to eliminate plastic and make a much more effective recycling scheme that can generate up to 450,000 stable employments and increase the regional GDP. I have much more employment, such digital inclusion, basic baskets, etc. There's a lot of other examples that provide examples that the big strategy that we need to grow with employment and with sustainability. Thank you for your, and I'm here for the questions and answers.
Esa ha sido pues la presentación del lanzamiento de este balance preliminar de las economías de América Latina y el Caribe para el 2020. Vamos a dar cuenta, como señalaba la señora Bárcena, del segmento de conferencia de prensa. Vamos a iniciar dando cuenta de las interrogantes que nos han hecho llegar muy queridas colegas desde México en este primer bloque. Ya lo anticipaba, por supuesto, la secretaria ejecutiva. Hay un tema de sumo interés en el debate público y económico mexicano, y así lo expresan tanto Yolanda Morales, del Economista, Ivette Saldaña, del Universal, y Silvia Rodríguez, de Milenio. Secretaria ejecutiva Yolanda Morales nos pregunta sobre el mismo tema, insisten tanto Ivette Saldaña como Silvia Rodríguez. En esta referencia al Banco de México, por cierto, poder contestar, darle una respuesta conjunta a las inquietudes coincidentes de estas tres colegas periodistas. Dice Yolanda Morales, del Economista. ¿Nos puede explicar, por favor, qué significa el Banco de México para el país? ¿Por qué es relevante su autonomía y credibilidad? ¿Y se puede considerársele como un ancla de estabilidad económica? Pregunta también Yolanda Morales, ¿cuánto tiempo tomará México recuperar los niveles económicos prepandemia en materia de riqueza, empleo, productividad? ¿Y qué papel debería jugar el Congreso, diputados y senadores, para apoyar esta reactivación? Ivette Saldaña, del Universal, le decía, pregunta, por cierto, ¿qué se debe la corrección de crecimiento para México del 2021, la proyección de la cual ha dado cuenta recién? Y insiste, por cierto, en
insists on learning your opinion with regard to a Mexican initiative that would allow the Bank of Mexico to purchase dollars without repatriating them. Would this have an impact on the situation? What about the purchasing of dollars that are essentially money laundered? Now, Silvio Rodriguez from the Millennial also asks about the banks of Mexico. What impact do you think this initiative would have, that is currency capturing? How would this impact the Bank of Mexico? And also asks about your assessment of the impact of the pandemic in Mexico versus the other countries. Also, what impact could the vaccination campaign have on economic recovery for next year? Now, with regard to these questions, perhaps you could refer to all of these, and then we will hear from the other colleagues. The floor is yours, Madam Secretary. Whose microphone is muted. Thank you. As far as Yolanda Morales, let's start with her question. Hi there, Yolanda. It's a pleasure to greet you. Of course, yes, we have pleasantly received the news that the debate in the Chamber of Deputies has been postponed with regard to the reform of the law of the Bank of Mexico, with regard to the mandatory purchase of currencies in cash. Now, we think it's important for all of the concerns to be taken into consideration. The actual President of the Republic mentioned that too. He is very much in favor of listening to all of the opinions and concerns from the various parties involved, finance ministry, the Association of Banks, and all of the various institutions and agency stakeholders that have something to say, because the Bank of Mexico is one of the most prestigious institutions and clearly has the mandate to preserve the purchasing power of the currency. So this is a key part of economic stability for all of the Mexican families. It is also a guarantor of the financial system and the commercial banks. So this is an anchor for the economic and financial stability of the country. So I believe that up until now, this has been an institution that has been managed with a great deal of soundness. And I believe that this institution has taken the right decisions with regard to the economic shocks. And the institution has been able to contain inflation. This has been extremely important. And I believe that it is worthwhile to maintain this situation. And clearly, I also believe that by postponing this discussion on the reform, what they are doing is creating an opportunity to have a more extensive debate on all of the various alternatives on the table. So I think it's essential to closer examine the operations, the functioning of the financial system, the central bank, the Bank of Mexico. What is the availability in terms of the reserves, international reserves, so on and so forth. I think it's very useful to have this debate. I think it's necessary at the same time. I also believe that as far as ECLAC is concerned, well, we're very pleased to take part if we were to be invited. We will be there if we're invited. We would love to assess the various range of alternatives to figure out what is best for the country, what is best for the Mexican households. And I think that is what is being addressed now. Now, there are other questions. Guido, should I answer them now, or should I? There are other questions that came in that whole package. For example, how long will it take Mexico to get back to the pre-pandemic levels? Yolanda also asked about that. Yes, sure. Why don't we move on to that second question by Yolanda Morales?
¿En qué se basaba la corrección de crecimiento para México en 2021?
Also, there's a question with regard to why was the Mexican growth rate forecast for 2020 corrected? And there's another question by Silvia Rodriguez. So, yes, go ahead. Well, at ECLAC, we have proposed focusing the pandemic issue in dealing with two key areas. For example, we've proposed supporting families, and Mexico has done that. The actual president announced an increase in minimum wage. So in other words, focusing on families' income, household incomes, the most vulnerable households as well. And Mexico is doing that. And ECLAC has also referred to investment. Public investment in Mexico in 2019 was 20.9% of the GDP. We said the region had dropped to 17% in terms of the investment GDP ratio. And Mexico is doing better than that. Into the second quarter, it's roughly at 14%. So the government of Mexico has implemented two key programs that I think are very important because one, they're trying to address aggregate demand on the one side and also make sure that you have investment with employment so that can have a positive impact on the economy. And the increase of the minimum wage as well is a very interesting and important announcement. Now, Mexico is also benefited because Mexico receives remittances. This corresponds to a significant cash flow. In 2020, they increased by 9% in Mexico, and that's a significant percentage. So we expect the economic activity in Mexico to recover at 3.8% roughly. Now, obviously, this is a first stab at this projection. In 2020, there's been a significant drop. It will continue to be an issue. But we have seen that there will be gradual recovery. That was gradual recovery in the third quarter. Now, what's important here is to understand the extent of this and the depth of the vaccination campaign. I think Mexico has put forward key efforts. Yesterday, for example, I think we heard from the Foreign Affairs Minister referring to access to vaccines. And I think that they are managing this quite transparently. The way in which Mexico is trying to obtain the necessary vaccines in order to reach all Mexican households. Significant agreements have been reached with AstraZeneca, I think with Pfizer as well. So yesterday, in fact, this news was announced. I think it's a key. Now, of course, there's no doubt that region-wide, that the holidays, upcoming holidays, will challenge the population in terms of the disciplined approach to the pandemic that we really need now. And the Mexican authorities and authorities throughout the entire region have really appealed to people to stay at home. And I think this is one of the most important issues. Stay at home, take care of yourselves, and take care of everyone else as well. I think this has been essential. The way the pandemic has been managed, that is in terms of information to the public, has been excellent. I think the authorities have invited the population to actually take the necessary precautions. Clearly, it is true that the hospital capacities are starting to be impacted, and that is exactly when we need to be more careful. So I believe that's important. It's also important to mention that fiscal support provided by the country has been key. On March 18th, there was a fund passed of 180 million pesos, 0.7% of the GDP in terms of support. So there is progress. We're seeing that there has been progress in terms of finding the best way to support these two areas that I pointed out. We think they're essential. That is investment and households. And of course, the healthcare system. We know that the healthcare system needs to boost its capacity. And we're seeing that in Mexico in terms of the public healthcare capacity.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias,
Thank you very
secretaria
much for
ejecutiva.
that,
Vamos a dar
Executive
entonces
Secretary.
segundo
Now
bloque
let
de
us move
interrogantes que
on
nos
with
han
the
hecho
second
llegar
block of questions that we have
los
received
colegas periodistas que están siguiendo esta conferencia de prensa. A
from
todos ellos
the
les reiteramos
journalists
nuestro
involved
agradecimiento.
in this
Estamos
press
muy activos y muy
conference.
intensos
We
en
would like to thank
términos
them
de
all in
ir
advance. We have
planteando
received
sus
a wealth
interrogantes,
of
sus
questions,
preguntas.
concerns,
En este
comments.
segundo
Thank you to all
bloque,
of you. So
secretaria
the second
ejecutiva,
block
quisiera
refers
compartir con ustedes las
to
interrogantes que nos hacen llegar desde Guatemala.
questions from Guatemala.
Tanto Daniel Colín del canal
Daniel Colín
TN23 de
from
Guatemala como Alejandra Soto de
TV23 and
revista
Alejandra
Suma,
Soto from
también
Suma magazine.
porque ambos coinciden en preguntarnos sobre cuáles son las razones para la proyección de crecimiento de Guatemala y que debe aprovecharse para mejorar el crecimiento sin descuidar el apoyo social, el énfasis que pone Daniel Colín de Canal TN3 Guatemala. Alejandra Soto de Revista Suma dice en el caso específico de Guatemala, ¿qué análisis se hace de cómo cierra la economía del 2020, tomando en cuenta que es uno de los países de la región que se pronostica menor baja en el crecimiento o el menor decrecimiento económico? La pregunta referida a Guatemala, coincidente en sus inquietudes tanto de Daniel Colín de Canal TN23 de Guatemala como de Alejandra Soto de Revista Suma. Patricia Nieto, corresponsal de la agencia española EFE, acá,
in Spain,
Santiago de Chile,
but from
consulta lo
Santiago,
siguiente,
Chile,
secretaria ejecutiva. Muchos
asks the
países están
following.
anticipando una
Many
segunda
countries
ola para
are
después
expecting
de
to see a
Navidad. ¿Cómo
second
puede afectar
wave
esto
of
las proyecciones del
infections? How can this have an
2021? Es la
impact
inquietud
on
que nos hace llegar
2021
Patricia Nieto,
projections? That is
corresponsal de
from
la agencia
Patricia
española
Nieto,
EFE.
correspondent from
Irma
EFE.
Catizano-Chan,
Irma
editora del
Catizano-Chan
Economista,
from
publicación de
the
Centroamérica,
Economista
plantea las
from
siguientes
Central America
interrogantes.
asks the
¿Cuáles
following.
considera que son los
What
países
do you
más
think,
afectados de
which
Centroamérica por la
do you
crisis
think
del
would be the most
COVID-19?
affected
¿Cuál será
countries in
este efecto
Central
a largo
America,
plazo?
most affected by
¿Y qué
COVID?
medidas
What's the
deberían tomar las
long-term
economías
impact?
de
And what
Costa
measures
Rica y El
should the Costa
Salvador en
Rican and
materia
El
fiscal?
Salvadoran
Con este
economies
bloque
take
de
in terms of
preguntas,
fiscal
secretaria
measures?
ejecutiva,
So let us move on with this second
parece,
block
le
of
devuelvo
questions.
la
Executive
palabra
Secretary,
para atender
the
las
floor
inquietudes
is
de los
yours.
colegas
Be
periodistas.
sure
Daniel
to
Colín de
turn on
TN23 de
your
Guatemala, Alejandra Soto de
microphone.
Revista Suma, ambas vinculadas al desempeño de
Two
Guatemala.
journalists from
Patricia Nieto,
Guatemala,
corresponsal de la
Patricia
agencia española
Nieto
EFE,
from
y Irma
EFE, and
Cantizano-Chan,
Irma
del Economista de
Cantizano-Chan
Centroamérica.
from the
La palabra es
Economista in
suya,
Central
secretaria
America,
ejecutiva.
or the Economist in Central America. Thank you for these important questions. I wanted to refer to the following. Now, ECLAC has estimated that in 2020, the Guatemalan economy will contract 2.5%. As you mentioned, this will be one of the least severe contractions. That's in the region. That's what the journalist said. And one moment, I agree with that. So yes, 2.5, less than 2.5% contraction. This is one of the least worst in the region, but the drop has been the result of confinement measures, restrictions on mobility, foreign demand, external demand, and I think also the ETA and Iota hurricanes have hit Guatemala quite hard. We cannot ignore that. And if ECLAC is assessing the damages and losses in Honduras and Guatemala, we are expecting to have these figures soon, probably by next week. We'll have a clear idea as to the actual cost in terms of the GDP with regard to infrastructure, lives, households for Guatemala and Honduras of these two events. I think that's very, very important because these are key components of the situation. Bridges have been destroyed, highways have been destroyed in Guatemala. So it will be essential to invest in the reconstruction efforts and do this differently, obviously. Now, we know that reconstruction of lost bridges, we heard some figures. This was actually mentioned by the actual presidency in terms of the number of federal and municipal bridges have been washed away and how many roads have been washed away. So all of this will call for significant reconstruction efforts, and the IDB from the Central American section and the Central American Bank rather is also acting, and there's essential investment projects, for example, Puerto Chiapas, Puerto Quetzal. This is an integration program, a Mesoamerican integrated program that will inject a lot, and then implementing the railroad between Mexico and Guatemala, another interesting project. So we know that Guatemala has significant deficiencies. Social support continues to be important, and providing support for the productive sector is key as well. Now, these are all very important issues for Guatemala, and that's why we simply cannot allow them to let their guard down. And we need to continue supporting these countries, as I mentioned, with international aid and obviously aid them in terms of the social programs. These will always be important in the case of Guatemala.
And the other important thing is that we have talked a lot about the integral development plan for Central America to support local communities in their production, development, agricultural, agribusiness is key. They have a lot of coffee crops, which is one of the most important export sources. So we need to see which sector need much more support, specifically in the household income and also in productivity and production. So in the case of Patricia Nieto, I think that I answered to Alejandra and Daniel Colin in their estimates of what will happen in 2020 in the estimate, which is this minus 2.5% drop and a recovery of 3.5% recovery that can be thanks to this recovery program. Patricia Nieto from EFE, from Spain. Yes, indeed, we are seeing the second wave. Unfortunately, Christmas, the holiday celebration, to some extent, the people, the population, it's tired of lockdowns and that, but we need to continue to fight. We have the vaccine is here, but it's not here. We don't have it here still. So people need to continue to take care of themselves. And yes, it can affect 2021 forecast. We told that are 4 things that can affect the 3.7 estimates or forecasts. But yes, indeed, it may have impacts. One of the most important, if there are new outbreaks, new lockdowns that will affect economic activity, how countries are going to respond with new measure of emergency basic income, whether they will be international financing condition, that the liquidity may be redistributed, what will happen with commodity prices. There's a lot of more question, but yes, without any doubt, the second wave will and may affect. So the invitation, and we call people to understand that, because they will have an impact in their life and in their income if the pandemics, if the scenario and the evolution of pandemics continues as it is today, we will have a very complicated first quarter. If we get the vaccine, maybe this probably second quarter of 2021 may be better, but nobody knows. It's very uncertain. And the only thing that I can say is invite people that people continue to be disciplined, because the pandemic is still out of control. And then Campesano, my dear Irma, editor of Economista, what are the most affected countries in Central America on COVID crisis, and what Costa Rica and El Salvador should do? The 2 most affected economies are Panama and El Salvador. El Salvador will have minus 0.86%, a very affected external sector and very strict lockdowns. Panama minus 11% because of the lockdowns. And one of the key pillars of Panamanian economy is sea trade, construction, tourism, that have reduced substantially their activities with a significant negative impact. We hope that there's a positive growth in 2021, but it will take many, many years to recover economic activities in these countries, especially for the long-term impact. And those countries is very serious. We are saying that it will take maybe up to 2023, 24 to start to recover to the previous level with the vaccination, with the vaccine already, with people already vaccinated. And this is important. And the only thing that I can say that in the case of El Salvador is a very strong and the recovery can be 3.5%. And this is important news. In the case of Panama, recovery can be 5.5% in 2021 if everything goes as planned. What are the measures of Costa Rica and El Salvador? El Salvador is a dollarized, dollar-based economy, and this is serious, and also Panama. So we have dollar-based economy in the region. Panama, El Salvador, and Ecuador. The three economies have more restrictions, more limits to carry forward expansionary monetary policies. So it is different. In Costa Rica, the debt of the central government accounts for 63, so 11 points more than recorded in 2019. So it is natural or logical, and we see as a very appropriate response from the government to request the international community rapid access to concessionary funds, because countries such as Costa Rica that have very accessible healthcare system, but they have a complicated fiscal situation, they do require external support, and the FASE initiative from Costa Rica can help alleviate this. But without any doubt, this is why it's so important to have access to concessionary sources for medium income country. This is a classic example. Costa Rica is one of the countries that spend more paying interest. So for this Central American country, the petition, the request is, unless there is a suspension or start, or nobody says that it will complete alleviation, but at least a suspension of the payment of interest that will help the country's current account. So in the case of El Salvador, the public debt is 86% of the GDP, 16 points more than recorded in 2019. So these are two economies that urgently need external concessionary support to alleviate the payment of interest, because they are very high, 86 in El Salvador, 67 in Costa Rica. So they need external support, and administrative and fiscal reform that put some order in tax evasion and tax avoidance, and rearrange tax privilege, which in Central America is higher than in the average of the region. I think it's 4.2% in. They have more tax exception in Central America than in the rest of the region, and we need to review this. I think with that, I answered this question block. Very comprehensive, very. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary Executive, and we open with the question of Natalia Ramos. She is a correspondent of Reuters. She asks, can you comment on the fragility shown on the report about the recovery of Latin American economy towards 2021? If without having sure access to vaccination, what is the outlook? You already addressed this in the previous question, but this is the question by our colleague from Reuters. Two questions from Panama. Alma Solís from SNP Noticias. What are the factors for estimated growth for this country? I think that she refers to estimated growth in Panama. And Roberto González from La Prensa, Panama, complementing the concerns, he said, is Panama the country with the greatest GDP contraction in the second quarter of 2020? Will Panama be among those that will suffer the greatest contraction extraction, what will be the reason for having a construction which is greater than the rest of Latin America countries and Central American countries? La Prensa is his question about the Panama's performance. And finally, in this block, the question from Natalia Gonzalez from TELAM, Argentina, and she asks how the region will benefit from the growth of Chinese economy, and especially how this impact of the Chinese growth will have an impact in the case of Argentina. And with these questions, Natalia Ramos from Reuters, Natalia Solís, Roberto González from La Prensa, Panamá, and Natalia González from TELAM of Argentina. I give you the floor back to you, Madam Secretary General. Thank you, Rastalia. May we miss Ernesto Gloria from Enfoque Noticias. I miss answering to Gloria from Mexico. I saw her on the chat. Yes. Yeah, maybe you can add in this block. Yes. Okay. What I want to say to Natalia Ramos from Reuters is that, yes, indeed, I think that we need to understand that we are in an incredible, never seen before moment of humankind, and our region is the hardest hit for many reasons. One, because we accumulate historical structural gaps, fragmented access to health care, social security. Remember if we recall the figures, 48% of the Latin American population and the Caribbean do not have access to health care or social security. So governments in many cases have had to, I would say, make a greater effort to really alleviate or reach this population. Yes, there is a very vulnerability and fragility. This is why it's so important to control the outbreaks. The possibility of growth is around 3.7%, and we hope that this will be the figure, and we should not go back to very low historical growth. And this 3.7%, it's not the solution for everything, because it only will allow us to recover 44% of what we lost in 2020. So it's a relative recovery, only of 44%. This is why it's so important to understand how we make up this model. And the idea is that with very macro fiscal monetary policies, the discipline of people, of the population, the support of government giving basic income to people and business, and enhance investment to go to the next step, transforming recovery. This is what we think that can help. Yes, there are economies that have received good news. China, with respect to Chile, and China regarding Argentina. The copper price, which is hit historical prices over more than $3.3 per pound, and this is extremely important for Chile, and the same, we can tell the same for other commodities, and this is an element that can help. And if the oil prices recover in economies such as the Mexican economy, to activate the free trade agreement, it's important to activate production, etc.
En muchos frentes, ¿verdad?
I think we need to act immediately, more so than ever, on many different fronts. We need to provide more capacity for the new synergies between the various sectors, social, industrial, environmental, financial, monetary, etc., all in order to address such a complicated scenario. Now, if we do not have secure access to a vaccine and we're facing a second wave, what is going to occur? Well, as far as this question is concerned, I think we have more information today than ever before. By the way, the society has access to information. We do know that the vaccines are there. We do know the differences between the different vaccines, that Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are genetic. They inject information into your system and allow your system to develop, to grow the antibodies, and the other vaccinations are inoculation with a deactivated live vaccine. So we know we have more information than before. We know that our governments are doing what they need to obtain the vaccines. And then we have the COVAX UN effort that refers to how to ensure that everyone across the board has access, universal access to the vaccines. And Ernesto Gloria referred to that, mentioning that if the vaccines will only be available through the public system, well, that's what all of the countries are doing. So far, there is not a single country that has announced that the vaccines will be available in the private sector by way of drugstores, pharmacies. No, not at all. It will be the public sector. And of course, this will be implemented in keeping with a very well-defined plan based on age groups. For example, in Chile, I had a very lengthy discussion with the Minister Paris yesterday, very interesting, where he explained to me how individuals under 18 years of age are not included on, or rather they are included, and they have done enough tests. They want to protect those individuals and are trying to do that. But I think every country is coming up with its own plan. But of course, there are international criteria that they are following at the same time. Now, we do need to know that logically there will be a lot of logistics or other types of support for the vaccines, the cold chain, distribution, logistics. For example, there are some countries who already have the cold chain available, cold systems at the hospital level, others do not. So all of these issues, logistics need to be addressed, and a UN system is available to support the countries in each country, support the countries in this process. Because in the end, I think humanity has worked very quickly. R&D has been amazing. They've come up with a vaccine in record time, and innovative vaccines. The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are part of a new generation of immunizations, and I think they're key. Now, Alma Solis from SNP Noticias in Panama referred to the drop in 11%, drop of 11%. Now, obviously, there are several reasons for this, and these drops, reductions are related to the measures that the countries are taking, the curfew, quarantine. This decrease in the service sector obviously has affected Panama. Panama is closely tied to the various service sectors, transportation, tourism. It's a hub, an air travel, maritime travel hub. And these are the areas that have been greatly affected. Now, construction, tourism, the impact has been quite profound and in depth in various economies such as Panama, because this is key in terms of different services, financial, construction, maritime, transportation, etc., so on and so forth. Now, obviously, this, in addition to the confinement measures, has been key. Now we see that exports, service exports have contracted, exports in the Cologne area, a reduction in the activity of the Panama Canal from January to September, 8% less in the same period in 2019. And the first quarter 2020, the most productive categories affected were construction, less 44%. Other community social activities were also impacted. Lottery, casino, less than 40% drop in restaurants, overall trade, 20 odd percent. So clearly, this is one of the economies that has been most affected. The Panamanian economy is closely tied to the service sector. Well, we know that. So how do we reach 5.5% for 2021? Well, we reached that figure. We drew that figure because of the various restrictive measures. We know that they have been lifted. There's been this gradual recovery of the economy of flights as well. The flights are starting up again in Panama. So, of course, with all the necessary sanitary measures, I believe this has injected a great deal of credibility and trust and into the passengers' minds. So this sanitary reliability is good news for Panama. Roberto Gonzalez asked about the reasons why. I think I already answered that. The reasons why in Panama we have had such market drops in the various sectors because of the service sector, construction sector also was seriously impacted. And then, of course, the canal and airport activities. Panama as an international hub of travel has been greatly hit hard. So that's
Como
what I
secretaria
have to say,
ejecutiva,
Guido. Thank
por un
you,
lado,
Executive Secretary.
agradecemos,
On
por
the one
cierto,
hand,
al
I would
colega
like
Ernesto
to
Gloria de Enfoque Noticias de México,
thank
cuya pregunta usted ya contestó también en el marco de
Mexico,
este bloque,
Ernesto
y
Gloria,
simplemente
for
le
the question.
recuerdo
And just
la
remind
inquietud de Natalia González de
you
Agencia
of the
TELAM
question
de
by
Argentina,
Telam, Natalia
quien
Gonzalez from Argentina. Oh, I forgot about that question. Yes, thank you. It slipped my mind. Yes, of course. Very important question from Natalia Gonzalez. Yes. Now, growth in China provides benefits to South America. That's something we know. These are the economies that export raw materials. So these are greatly benefited by growth in China. As we saw in 2021, there will be an increase in international prices of export products. As far as Argentina is concerned, this has been quite relevant and pertinent. I think that China is the main destination of Argentine soy exports. So that it's a third supplier. Argentina is a third global supplier of soybeans around the world. So third supplier to China as well. And China is 2.9, 8.1 recovery this year, the next year. So we see that the prices are bouncing back, prices for agricultural products, soy, for example, in this case. And I think the boost for the 4.9 increase for the Argentine economy is interesting. And this refers to the expectations in terms of internal consumption, domestic consumption, and exports.
Muchísimas gracias, secretaria ejecutiva. Vamos a dar cuenta, por tanto,
you,
de
Executive
el siguiente y
Secretary.
último bloque
Let's move on to the
de
next and
preguntas
final
que nos
block
han hecho
of
llegar.
questions
Reiteramos nuestro
that we
agradecimiento a
have
las y los
received.
colegas periodistas
Actually,
que
that
han
was the
estado
third
acompañando
block.
este
Once again,
lanzamiento
thank you
y
to all the
conferencia de
journalists who
prensa.
have
En este
joined
último
us
bloque,
here.
secretaria ejecutiva, mire,
Final block right
Leticia
now
Hernández
of questions.
de
Patricia
El Financiero,
Hernandez from
desde
El
México,
Financiero in Mexico.
nos pregunta cuál debe ser la colaboración del
What
sector
type
privado
of
con las autoridades
collaboration should we
gubernamentales
expect
en la
between the
distribución de
private sector
vacunas
and the
para contribuir a
authorities
un
with regard to
desplazamiento
vaccine
efectivo que
distribution
logre
so
controlar los
that
contagios?
we will have
Leticia Hernández,
effective
del Financiero de
distribution
México.
without
Josefina
contagion
Bruni,
and
de
infection
Latin Finance,
rates.
nos
Ms.
consulta
Bruni
lo
from
siguiente.
Latin Finance
La
asked the
doctora Bárcena
following.
nos dio la buena
Now,
noticia de que el riesgo
we
soberano de
saw
la
some
región ha
good news
disminuido
that
y que el
the
acceso al mercado de bonos ha
There's greater
mejorado, pero
access to the
solo para
bond
algunos
market in the
países.
region,
but just for
¿Qué
a few
opciones de
countries.
financiamiento
So
se vienen
what
perfilando para el año
financing
que viene para los países que no
options
tienen
do
ese
you
acceso
see
a los
are
mercados
appearing as
internacionales
a
y que
profile for
sufren un
countries that do not have
deterioro de
access
su
to
déficit
international
fiscal?
markets, but
Es la
that
pregunta de
have seen
Josefina
a
Bruni
drop
de
or an
Latin
increase in their
Finance.
fiscal deficit?
Sierra
That's from
Gómez,
Latin
corresponsal
Finance.
de la
Now,
agencia
Sierra
china de
Gomez from
noticias
the
Xinhua,
Chinese news
consulta.
agency Xinhua is
Parte
asking
de
the
esto usted
following.
acaba justamente de dar cuenta, pero planteamos este interrogante de Sierra Gómez de la agencia china Xinhua.
You
¿Qué
realize that
papel
we
podría
already
jugar
asked
Panamá
about
como
that.
puerta
So
de
what
entrada
role could
de
Panama play
China a
as a
América
port of
Latina para
entry,
contribuir a la recuperación
China to
económica
Latin
que nos está
America? And
pasando en
how
la
can
región como hub
this add,
logístico
how can
y
Panama
además ser uno de los
add
países
to
que
the
acogió la
recovery as a
iniciativa china
logistics
de la
hub
franja y la
for the
ruta?
reason
Es la pregunta
region?
de Sierra
That's the
Gómez.
question
Y
from Sierra
concluimos
Gomez.
las interrogantes de
That's
las y los
all
colegas
we have
periodistas en esta
for
conferencia
you
de prensa
today.
con la inquietud de Montserrat Toledo,
Actually, one
del
more
diario
from
Financiero de
Montserrat
Chile.
Toledo from
Montserrat
the
tiene las
Financial
siguientes preguntas.
News
¿Qué
in
factores explican
China.
la revisión al
What
alza de la
factors
proyección para
explain
Chile
why
de este
you
año?
have seen
¿Qué
a
impactos pueden tener las recientes
increase for the
restricciones que se han impuesto en
forecast
la
for
región metropolitana de
Chile?
Santiago
what impact could the restrictions in the Santiago metropolitan region have, and why have you come up with this 5%? What factors have contributed to this 5% growth rate projection for Chile? Josefina Bruni, Sierra Gomez from Xinhua and Montserrat Toledo from the Chilean Diario Financiero. Interpreter corrects herself, not Chinese, but Chilean Diario. Thank you for those questions. I'm going to go back to Ernesto Gloria's question. I don't want to forget about that from Enfoque Noticia. That is with regard to the potential impact of vaccinations. It will take more than a year. We know that the government has mentioned that this will be in the public sector, not private sector. So I answer that question, that yes, this is what we're seeing in all the countries around the globe, public distribution of the public health system for now. And I think that Mexico specifically has taken great steps and is expecting to receive 34.4 million vaccines from Pfizer in upcoming days. And I think that this is very important because also an agreement was signed with CanSino Biologics for 36 million units, AstraZeneca 38 million, and this is in keeping with a framework agreement with Argentina and with private companies as well. There are foundations. And also we have a detailed information as to Novavax, CureVac, and the manufacturers of the Sputnik Russian vaccine, but obviously they're waiting on authorization from COFEPRIS, which is the agency that authorizes this. So Mexico has actually taken a lot of steps forward. Mexico is working on ensuring more than a very high figure of vaccines. And this is key. And Mexico has a national immunization program as well that has actually already been announced. I think everyone knows when they will be receiving their vaccination in Mexico. So it's crucial for people to have information about this. And in Mexico, the vaccine will be free. That's key information too. I would just like to reiterate that the most important aspect here is that this immunization campaign globally, at least in the developed world and in some emerging economies, and hopefully all of this will reach the smaller, more impoverished economies. That's in part what the UN is trying to do. And what we want to make sure is that people don't let down their guard in terms of the preventative measures. We need to continue wearing our masks, keeping that social distancing, and that's essential. Let's not go out and party on vacation because it's Christmas. That's not the time. We want to live. We want to live. That's what we want to do. So it's time to do social distancing, wear your masks, wash your hands, and clearly one of the major issues is this significant demand for vaccines. I think that the more developed states have actually are competing to gain access to the vaccines. And this word solidarity is a key word we're hearing from the international community. We do not want to see more of a gap between the haves and have-nots.
How can the private sector collaborate with governmental authorities in the distribution of vaccine for a speedy deployment? What first, private hospital and private clinics? I think that there we have a very important element. Private hospitals and private clinics need to play a significant role in distribution and in everything that will be required of infrastructure for distributing the vaccine, to make available the medical team, the medical supplies. So we need a collaboration and coalition between private and public sectors, and they are already doing. There are many private companies that have shown their solidarity, and a collaboration between private sector, social organization, public government, started from private clinics and hospitals. They all have a role to play. In the case of Mexico, we have the great example of the SLIM Foundation that, together with Argentina and Mexico, two national companies, one from Argentina, one from Mexico, are participating in the AstraZeneca vaccine production and distribution, and we hope that this can be expanded to all other vaccines. There is a very active process of bargaining and discussion with the public and private sector. In Chile, the private sector imported respirators from China. Industrial chambers of commerce were also actively involved in solving many of those problems, at least here in Chile. It's a moment to make a significant universal call so that the public, the private, and the society change and sweep the information and put to the service of a free universal vaccine for everybody. Josefina Bruni, there is a less sovereign risk in the region. What are the funding alternative for next year? This is one of the main concerns that we have expressed in this report. And this is why we think that the international community needs to provide support, because so far we are continue to do in business as usual. Countries that have access to market go to the market, they place treasury bond. Countries such as Peru and Chile, the usual suspects. But I think that we need to achieve that this greater or bigger international liquidity expand and can reach each one of the Latin American and Caribbean countries. We propose that if there is an issue of $500 billion of equivalent, the region can receive 40 billion, 2 billion for the Caribbean. And this is extremely important, and our region can benefit because this will help reinforce banks, reserve, and so that they can give more liquidity to each one of their economies. Yes, the monetary fund has made available $64 billion, the IDBD 15 billion, the regional bank in the case of the CAF 4 billion, the FASE initiative from Costa Rica. So we need coordinated responses that all Central America operates under one single voice, or South America, the region in total, to have one single voice to go to the G20 under the chairmanship of Italy, that 3 countries will bring the voice of smaller economies, and that they press for priorities, alleviation of interest payment, expand the G20 initiative to the small island developing state. There are proposals, special drawing rights, etc. So this is what we are looking for. So what we hope that we continue with conventional and non-conventional policies regarding diminishing interest rate, and the agreement among central banks that have played an important role to increase the availability of resources, and also maintaining an active fiscal policy, so that in monetary terms, in liquidity world global liquidity, there is a liquidity. And in terms of who will access to liquidity today under the current rules, there are not so many countries. The countries that have more support or economic support pay less economy interest than small economy, because a small economy are less trustworthy or run into higher risk, as the grading agency do. So rating agencies, we hope that they will sit around the table with private creditors also, because a large part of the debt is in the hand of private creditors so far. So they need to sit in the table and discuss and help. Well, at the fiscal level, yes, reduce tax evasion, tax avoidance, expand the reach of taxes, especially in economies where the tax rate is very, very low, and also how that make so that public expenditure is strategically oriented to household, small and medium-sized companies, and to make universal health care available. Sierra Gomez from the Tsinghua Chinese agency. What is the role of Panama as the gateway or logistics hub? Panama has been one of the countries that signed the strip and the route in our country, in our region. Next Friday, there will be an advisory committee of the strip and the route. I was invited, I've observed. This is a great honor to me, and I will attend, because Panama is specialized in logistics services with a privileged geographic position, and it's a key node for global trade. So in this rearrangement of the world, where we will have a big Asia Pacific hub, China, Korea, Japan has already signed a free trade agreement, the largest one in the world. And then we have Europe, which is reconfiguring its economic activity. And then we have the free trade agreement with Mexico, Canada, and the United States that we need to benefit and take advantage from. How some Asian companies are looking for near shoring. It's not that they want to go next to their place of origin. They want to reach markets. In this case, they want to be closer to the American market, and Panama can play a very important role for Asian and Chinese companies. And I think that, yes, indeed, Panama has an important role or place in this rearrangement. And in this, the strategy of China that has evolved over time. Today, China is much more oriented towards strategic investment. Previously, China was more oriented to buying raw materials. They are Chinese companies are interested in investing in strategic sectors and buying companies, and most of the mergers and acquisitions that we present in foreign direct investment a few weeks ago reflected their interest. Montserrat Toledo, what factors explain what impact can have the restriction in the metropolitan region, and what factors lead you to project the 5.5% growth in the case of Chile? In Chile, the fall in the second semester was 3.5 in the second quarter. Sorry, comparing second to first quarter. The third quarter, the growth was much more strong than foreseen, and this has been very important as a result of the significant policy, expansionary policy, fiscal effort. They have established packages to deal with the emergency. First package is equivalent to 4.7% of the GDP intended for employment, health. The first part of the 10% withdrawal of private pension funds account, it is fostering a private consumption also, and we see that the first withdrawal of funds from a pension fund has a very positive 1.8 percentage points of the GDP regarding the accumulated GDP for 2021. So it's a massive impact of this withdrawal. And another very important aspect is the significant rise or increase in copper price from March through December, 49% from $2.34 per pound to $3.5 per pound. This is the final price of copper in December as a consequence of the demand from China and the reduction of international inventories. And this is a great help to Chilean economy. The recent restrictions are relative because what is being restricted is over the weekends. And overall, so I think that it's a very important signal that we are facing a potential new outbreak of a magnitude that can be very important. This is why lockdowns will have an impact without any doubt on the economy and on consumption, but it's very important that the people will really abide by the guidelines from the government of Chile and the health authorities. I live in Chile and I see how great, enormous effort they are doing to inform the community so that they make the best decision. Why 5.5% growth? Because we see that there was an improvement, especially during the third quarter and maybe in the fourth quarter. And so we foresee a 5.5% growth with the influence of the recovery in China, copper prices, and the second withdrawal of 10% from the private pension fund. So more than 6 million people in Chile are requested the second withdrawal of their own pension funds. So 56% of people will make effective this withdrawal. And that can have very important aggregate effects and will contribute that millions of families will be able to deal with the terrible dilemma of unemployment, lockdowns, and the second wave of the disease. The second withdrawal maybe will have a lesser effect. The effect could be of 1 percentage point. And with that, I think that the active fiscal policy in Chile must come. They cannot do all with the withdrawing money from pension funds. So the government needs to make a significant fiscal effort to provide support to household and business. Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. We thank and appreciate your time to answer the numerous questions that we have received from our journalists, colleague journalists from the region, from around the region. We want to tell all of them that the materials are already available in the ECLAC website, the document itself, and also growth tables, and the public information unit is always available to answer to any further question that you may have. Madam Executive Secretary, to complete and to end, I want to give you the floor to share with us one final thoughts, takeaway message
los datos que contiene este balance preliminar de las economías y la reflexión que sobre esta foto de la realidad que con rigor la CEPAL propone y pone a la disposición de la opinión pública, qué mensajes podemos rescatar de aquello para nuestro presente y futuro.
All of this for our future and present? I just wanted to repeat, well, I don't really want to repeat everything. I would just like to prioritize a few aspects. First message is the pandemic is not over. The pandemic is still present. We are in the midst of it, and we are constant.
Fundamental. Yo creo que ese es el mensaje número uno. Que no
We're constantly hearing the threat of new areas of infection, so it's not over. That's the message. Second, growth is not dynamic. The growth is less than what we expected. It's the worst drop in 120 years, and the growth we're expecting for next year will be lean. We will not get back the 44% that we lost in 2020. And let's not forget the clear risks. For example, we have not received the vaccine yet. So time is of the essence. And we, while waiting, may have issues in terms of supply, companies, trade, and expansive policies. Let's not withdraw the fiscal stimuli. Let's breathe some fresh air into the economy. Only the international community, the central banks, the governments can do that. Families can't do much. It's the government, international community, the governments, the banks. I repeat. Employment, investment, those are the two key areas. This is what we can do to reactivate our economies as quickly as possible. The economy is sick. So this sword of Damocles is once again leaning in. So Mario Cimoli, the Deputy Executive Secretary, is with me. Daniel Titelman, the Director of the Economic Development Sector, Noel Perez, Ivan Perez, Noel Michael Haney, Pablo Carballo, Alberto Foz, Pablo Llanes, Martina Vélez, Carlos Musi, Juan Carlos Ramirez, all of these individuals, directors of the national offices, sub-regional offices have supported us, as well as this team that has been helping me, Bianca Aliagui, among others. So thank you, Guido, to you and your team. Thanks to Pedro Espinosa, who has made this transmission possible, the streaming possible. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Executive Secretary. This event is hereby concluded. Publication, official launching of the preliminary overview. So we'd like to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, who have joined us, the journalists as well, who have not just joined us today, but who have joined us throughout the year on the numerous occasions where we have published and presented ECLAC reports and publications. Thank you so much for your support during this extremely challenging 2020 hour. We are truly appreciative for your interest and your willingness to be here and help us spread the word. So thank you very much for this, and thank you for accompanying us in the future. We will see you in the future, and a warm embrace across the wavelengths. Please take care of yourselves, and once again, thank you for your role, which is essential so that we can ensure that our message is spread far and wide throughout the region and elsewhere. Thank you, and thank you to the Executive Secretary, Alicia Bárcena, and the journalists once again. Thank you for all of your work. Goodbye. Have a lovely afternoon and a lovely day. Thank you. A warm embrace to all of you, ladies.